Episode 8 of The Flaming Jewel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Flaming Jewel by Robert W. Chambers. Episode 8. Cup and Lip. 1. 2 miles beyond Clinch's dump, Hal Smith pulled Stormont's horse to a walk. He was tremendously excited. With naïve sincerity, he believed that what he had done on the spur of the moment had been the only thing to do. By snatching the flaming jewel from Quintana's fingers, he had diverted that vindictive bandit's fury from Eve, from Clinch, from Stormont, and had centered it upon himself. More than that, he had sown the seeds of suspicion among Quintana's own people. They never could discover Salzar's body. Always they must believe that it was Nicholas Salzar and no other who so treacherously robbed them, and who rode away in a rain of bullets, shaking the emblazoned morocco case above his masked head in triumph, derision, and defiance. At the recollection of what had happened, Hal Smith drew bridle, and sitting his saddle there in the false dawn, threw back his handsome head and laughed until the fading stars overhead swam in his eyes through tears of sheerest mirth. For he was still young enough to have had time for his life. Nothing in the Great War had so thrilled him, for in what had just happened there was humour. There had been none in the great grim drama. Still, Smith began to realize that he had taken the long, long chance of the opportunist who rolls the bones with death. He had kept his pledge to the little Grand Duchess. It was a clean job. It was even good drama. The picturesque angle of the affair shook Hal Smith with renewed laughter. As the moving picture hero he thought himself the funniest thing on earth. From the time he had poked a pistol against Sard's fat paunch to this bullet-pelted ride for life, life had become one ridiculously exciting episode after another. He had come through like the hero in a bestseller, lacking only a heroine. If there had been any heroine, it was Eve Strayer. Drama had gone wrong in that detail. So perhaps, after all, it was real life he had been living and not a drama. Drama, for the masses, must have a definite beginning and ending. Real life lacks the latter. In life, nothing is finished. It is always a premature curtain that is yanked by that doddering old stagehand, Johnny Death. Smith sat his saddle, thinking, beginning to be sobered now by the inevitable reaction which follows excitement and mirth as relentlessly as care dogs the horseman. He had had a fine time. Save for the horror of the rock trail, he shuddered. Anyway, at worst, he had not shirked a clean deal in that ghastly game. It was God's mercy that he was not lying where Salzar lay, 10 feet, 20 feet, 100 deep, perhaps, in immemorial slime. He shook himself in his saddle as though to be rid of the creeping horror, and wiped his clammy face. Now, in the false dawn, a blue jay awoke somewhere among the oaks and filled the misty silence with harsh grace notes. Then reaction, setting in like a tide, stirred more sombre depths in the heart of this young man. He thought of Riga and of the Red Terror, of murder at noonday and outrage by night. He remembered his only encounter with a lovely child, once Grand Duchess of Estonia, then a destitute refugee in silken rags. What a day that had been, only one day and one evening, and never had he been so near in love all his life. That one day and evening had been enough for her to confide to an American officer her entire life's history, for him to pledge himself to her service while life endured. And if emotion had swept every atom of reason out of his youthful head, there turmoil and alarm, there the terrified, riotous city jammed with refugees, reeking with disease, half frantic from famine and the filthy rising flood of war. If really it had been merely romantic impulse, ardour born of overwrought sentimentalism, nevertheless what he had pledged that day to a little Grand Duchess in rags he had fulfilled to the letter within the hour. As the false dawn began to fade, he loosened hunting coat and cartridge sling, drew from his shirt bosom the morocco case. It bore the arms and crest of the Grand Duchess Theodorica of Estonia. His fingers trembled slightly as he pressed the jewelled spring. It opened on an empty casket. In the sudden shock of horror and astonishment, his convulsive clutch on the spring started a tiny bell ringing. Then, under his very nose, the empty tray slid aside, revealing another tray underneath, set solidly with brilliance. A rainbow glitter streamed from the unsilken tray. Like an incredible child he touched them. They were magnificently real. In the center lay blazing the great Erosite gem, the flaming jewel itself. Priceless diamonds, sapphires, emeralds ringed it. In his hands he held nearly $4 million. Gingerly he balanced the emblazoned case, fascinated, Then he replaced the empty tray, closed the box, thrust it into the bosom of his flannel shirt and buttoned it again. Now there was little more for the excited young man to do. Hal Smith, hold-up man and dishwasher at Clinch's Dump, had ended his career. The time had now arrived for him to vanish and make room for James Darragh. Because there still remained a very agreeable rôle for Darragh to play, and he meant to eat it up, as Broadway has it. For by this time the Grand Duchess of Estonia, Rika, as she had been called by her companion, Valentine, the pretty Countess Orloff Sterowitz, must have arrived in New York. At the big hunting lodge of the late Henry Harrod, now inherited by Darragh, there might be a letter, perhaps a telegram, a cue for Hal Smith to vanish and for James Darragh to enter, playing his brief but glittering part. And Darragh's sequence of pleasing meditations halted abruptly. To walk out of the life of the little Grand Duchess did not seem to suit his ideas, indefinitely hazy as they were so far. He lifted the bridle from the horse's neck, divided curb and snaffle thoughtfully, touching the splendid animal with heel and knee. As he cantered on into the wide forest road that led to his late uncle's abode, curiosity led him to wheel into a narrower trail leading east along Star Pond, from whence he could take a farewell view of Clinch's Dump. He smiled to think of Eve and Stormont there together, now in safety behind the bolted doors and shutters. He grinned to think of Quintana and his precious crew, blood-crazy, baffled, probably already distrusting one another, yet running wild through the night like starving wolves galloping at hazard across famine-stricken waste. Only wait till Stormont makes his report, he thought, grinning more broadly still. Every state trooper north of Albany will be after Señor Quintana. Some hunting! And if he could understand, Mike Clinch might thank his stars for what I've done this night has saved him his skin and Eve a broken heart. He drew his horse to a walk now, for the path began to run closer to Star Pond, skirting the pebbled shallows in the open just ahead. Alders still concealed the house across the lake, but the trail was already coming out into the starlight. Suddenly his horse stopped short, trembling, its ears pricked forward. Darragh sat listening intensely for a minute. Then, with infinite caution, he leaned over the cantle and gently parted the alders. On the pebble beach, full in the starlight, stood two figures, one white and slim, the other dark. The arm of a dark figure clasped the waist of the white and slender one. Evidently they had heard his horse, for they stood motionless, looking directly at the alders between which his horse had halted. The turn might mean a shot in the back, as far as Darragh knew. He was still masked with Salzar's red bandana. He raised his rifle, slid a cartridge into the breech, pressed his horse forward with a slight touch of heel and knee, and rode slowly into the star dusk. What Stormont saw was a masked man riding his horse, with menacing rifle half lifted for a shot. What Eve Strayer thought she saw was too terrible for words, and before Stormont could prevent her she sprang in front of him, covered his body with hers. At that the horseman tore off his red mask. "Eve! Jack Stormont! What the devil are you doing over here?" Stormont walked slowly up to his own horse, laid one unsteady hand on its silky nose, kept it there while dusty velvet lips mumbled and caressed his fingers. "I knew it was a cavalryman," he said quietly. "I suspected you, Jim. It was the sort of crazy thing you were likely to do. I don't ask you what you're up to, where you've been, what your plans may be. If you needed me, you'd have told me. But I've got to have my horse for Eve. Her feet are wounded. She's in her nightdress and wringing wet. I've got to set her on my horse and take her through to Ghost Lake." Darragh stared at Stormont, at the ghostly figure of the girl who had sunk down on the sand at the lake's edge. Then he scrambled out of the saddle and handed over the bridle. "Quintana came back," said Stormont. "I hope to reckon with him some day. I believe he came back to harm Eve. We got out of the house. We swam the lake. I'd have gone under except for her." In his distress and overwhelming mortification Darragh stood, miserable, mute, irresolute. Stormont seemed to understand. "What you did, Jim, was well meant," he said. "I understand. Eve will understand when I tell her. But that fellow Quintana is a devil. You can't draw a herring across any trail he follows. I tell you, Jim, this fellow Quintana is either blood mad or just plain crazy. Somebody will have to put him out of the way. I'll do it if I ever find him. Yes, your people ought to do that. Or, if you like, I'll volunteer. I've a little business to transact in New York first. Jack, your tunic and breeches are soaked. I'll be glad to chip in something for Eve. Wait a moment." He stepped into cover, drew the morocco box from his grey shirt, shoved it into his hip pocket. Then he threw off his cartridge belt and hunting coat, pulled the grey shirt over his head, and came out in his undershirt and breeches, with the other garments hanging over his arm. "Give her these," he said. "She can button the coat around her waist for a skirt. She'd better go somewhere and get out of that soaking wet nightdress. Eve crouched on the sand, trying to wring out and twist up her drenched hair, looked up at Stormont as he came toward her holding out Darragh's dry clothing. "You'd better do what you can with these," he said, trying to speak carelessly. "He says you'd better chuck what you're wearing." She nodded in flushed comprehension. Stormont walked back to his horse, his boots slopping water at every stride. "I don't know a place nearer than Ghost Lake Inn," he said, "except Harrod's." "That's where we're going, Jack," said Darragh cheerfully. "That's your place, isn't it?" "It is. But I don't want Eve to know it. I think it better she not know me except as Hal Smith, for the present anyway. You'll see to that, won't you?" "As you wish, Jim. Only if we go to your own house." "We're not going to the main house. She wouldn't, anyway. Clinch has taught that girl to hate the very name of Harrod. Hate every foot of forest that Harrod gamekeepers patrol. She wouldn't cross my threshold to save her life." "I don't understand, but it's all right, whatever you say, Jim. I'll tell you the whole business some day. But where I'm going to take you now is a brand new camp which I ordered built last spring. It's within a mile of the state forest border. Eve won't know that it's Harrod's property. I've a hatchery there, and the state lets me have a man in exchange for free fry. When I get there I'll post my man. It will be a roof for tonight, anyway, and breakfast in the morning whenever you're ready." "How far is it?" "Only about 3 miles east of here." "That's the thing to do, then," said Stormont bluntly. He dropped one sopping wet sleeve over his horse's neck, taking care not to touch the saddle. He was thinking of the handful of gems in his pocket. He wondered why Darragh had said nothing about the empty case for which he had so recklessly risked his life. Or what this whole business was about Stormont had no notion. But he knew Darragh. That was sufficient to leave him tranquil, and perfectly certain that whatever Darragh was doing must be the right thing to do. Yet Eve had swum Star Pond with her mouth filled with jewels. When she had handed the morocco box to Quintana, Stormont now realized that she must have placed her last card on the utterly desperate chance that Quintana might go away without examining the case. Evidently she had emptied the case before she left her room. He recollected that, during all that followed, Eve had not uttered a single word. He knew why, now. How could she speak with her mouth full of diamonds? A slight sound from the shore caused him to turn. Eve was coming toward him in the dusk, moving painfully on her wounded feet. Darragh's flannel shirt and hunting coat, buttoned around her slender waist, clothed her. The next instant he was beside her, lifting her in both arms. Placed her in the saddle, adjusted one stirrup to her bandaged foot. She turned and quietly thanked Darragh for the clothing. "And that was a brave thing you did," she added, "to risk your life for my father's property. Because the morocco case which you saved proved to be empty does not make what you did any less loyal and gallant." Darragh gazed at her, astounded, took the hand she stretched out to him, held it with a silly expression on his features. "Hal Smith," she said with perceptible emotion, "I take back what I once said to you on Owl Marsh. No man's a real crook by nature who did what you have done. That is faithfulness unto death, the supreme offer, loyalty." Her voice broke. She pressed Darragh's hand convulsively, and her lip quivered. Darragh, with the morocco case full of jewels buttoned into his hip pocket, stood motionless, mutely swallowing his amazement. What in the world did this girl mean, talking about an empty case? But this was no time to unravel that sort of puzzle. He turned to Stormont, who, as perplexed as he, had been listening in silence. "Lead your horse forward," he said. "I know the trail. All you need to do is follow me." And shouldering his rifle, he walked leisurely into the woods, the cartridge belt sagging en bandoulière across his woolen shirt. II When Stormont gently halted his horse, it was dawn, and Eve, sagging against him with one arm around his neck, sat huddled on her saddle, fast asleep. In a birch woods on the eastern slope of the divide stood the log camp, dimly visible in the silvery light of early morning. Darragh cautioned Stormont with a slight gesture, went forward, mounted the rustic veranda, and knocked on a lighted window. A man, already dressed, came and peered out at him, then hurried to open the door. "I didn't know you, Captain Darragh," he began, but fell silent under the warning gesture that checked him. "I've a guest outside. She's Clinch's stepdaughter, Eve Strayer. She knows me by the name of Hal Smith. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Cut that out, too. I'm Hal Smith to you. Also, State Trooper Stormont out there with Eve Strayer. He was a comrade of mine in Russia. I'm Hal Smith to him, by mutual agreement. Now, do you get me, Ralph?" "Sure, Hal. Go on. Spit it out." They both grinned. "You're a hooch runner," said Darragh. "This is your shack. The hatchery is only a blind. That's all you have to know, Ralph. So put that girl into my room and let her sleep till she wakes of her own accord. Stormont and I will take 2 of the guest bunks in the L. And for heaven's sake make us some coffee when you make your own. But first come out and take the horse." They went out together. Stormont lifted Eve out of the saddle. She did not wake. Darragh led the way into the log house and along a corridor to his own room. "Turn down the sheets," whispered Stormont. And when the bed was ready, "Can you get a bath towel, Jim?" Darragh fetched one from the connecting bathroom. "Wrap it around her wet hair," whispered Stormont. "Good heavens, I wish there were a woman here." "I wish so, too," said Darragh. "She's chilled to the bone. You'll have to wake her. She can't sleep in what she's wearing. It's almost as damp as her hair." He went to the closet and returned with a man's morning robe as soft as fleece. "Somehow or other she's got to get into that," he said. There was a silence. "Very well," said Stormont, reddening. "If you'll step out, I'll manage." He looked Darragh straight in the eyes. "I've asked her to marry me," he said. When Stormont came out a great fire of birch logs was blazing in the living room and Darragh stood there, his elbow on the rough stone mantelshelf. Stormont came straight to the fire and set one spurred boot on the fender. "She's warm and dry and sound asleep," he said. "I'll wake her again if you think she ought to swallow something hot." At that moment the fish culturist came in with a pot of steaming coffee. "This is my friend Ralph Weir," said Darragh. "I think you'd better give Eve a cup of coffee. And to Weir, fill a couple of hot water bags, old chap. We don't want any pneumonia in this house." When breakfast was ready, Eve once more lay asleep, with a slight dew of perspiration on her brow. Darragh was half starved. Stormont ate little. Neither spoke at all until, satisfied, they rose ready for sleep. At the door of his room, Stormont took Darragh's offered hand, understanding what it implied. "Thanks, Jim. Hers is the loveliest character I've ever known. If I weren't as poor as a homeless dog, I'd marry her to morrow. I'll do it anyway, I think. I can't let her go back to Clinch's dump." "After all," said Darragh, smiling, "if it's only money that worries you, why not talk about a job to me?" Stormont flushed heavily. "That's rather wonderful of you, Jim." "Why? You're the best officer I had. Why the devil did you go into the constabulary without talking to me?" Stormont's upper lip seemed inclined to twitch as he controlled it and scowled at space. "Go to bed, you darned fool," said Darragh carelessly. "You'll find dry things ready. Ralph will take care of your uniform and boots." Then he went into his own quarters to read 2 letters which, conforming to his arrangements made with Mrs. Ray the day he had robbed Emmanuel Sard, were to be sent to Trout Lodge to await his arrival. Both, written from the Ritz, bore the date of the day before. The first he opened was from the Countess Orloff Strelwitz. "Dear Captain Darragh, "You are so wonderful. Your messenger, with the $10,000 which you say you already have recovered from those miscreants who robbed Rika, came aboard our ship before we landed. It was a godsend. We were nearly penniless, and oh so shabby. Instantly, my friend, we shopped, Rika and I. Fifth Avenue enchanted us. All misery was forgotten in the magic of that paradise for women. Yet, spendthrifts that we naturally are, we were not silly enough to be extravagant. Rika was wild for American sport clothes. I also. Yet only 2 gowns apiece, except our sport clothes, and other necessities. Don't you think we were economical? Furthermore, dear Captain Darragh, we are hastening to follow your instructions. We are leaving today for your chateau in the wonderful forest, of which you told us that never-to-be-forgotten day in Riga. Your agent is politeness, consideration, and kindness itself. We have our accommodations. We leave New York at midnight. Rika is so excited that it is difficult for her to restrain her happiness. God knows the child has seen enough unhappiness to quench the gaiety of anybody. Well, all things end, even tears, even the Red Terror shall pass from our beloved Russia. For after all, Monsieur, God still lives. Valentine. P.S. Rita has written to you too. I have read the letter. I have let it go uncensored. Darragh went to the door of his room. "Ralph, Ralph," he called, and when Weir hurriedly appeared. "What time does the midnight train from New York get into Fire Lakes?" "A little before 9. You can make it there in the flivver, can't you?" "Yes, if I start now." "All right. 2 ladies. You're to bring them to the house, not here. Mrs. Ray knows about them. And get back here as soon as you can." He closed his door again, sat down on the bed, and opened the other letter. His hands shook as he unfolded it. He was so scared and excited that he could scarcely decipher the angular girlish penmanship. "To dear Captain Darragh, our champion and friend. It is difficult for me, Monsieur, to express my happiness and my deep gratitude in the so cold formality of the written page. Alas, sir, It will be still more difficult to find words for it when again I have the happiness of greeting you in proper person. Valentine has told you everything. She warns me, and I am, therefore, somewhat at a loss to know what I should write to you. Yet I know very well what I would write if I dare. It is this that I wish you to know, although it may not pass the censor, that I am most impatient to see you, monsieur. Not because of the kindness past, nor with an unworthy expectation of benefits to come, but because of friendship, the deepest, sincerest of my whole life. Is it not modest of a young girl to say this? Yes, surely all of the world which was once en règle, formal, artificial, has been burnt out of our hearts by this frightful calamity which has overwhelmed the world with fire and blood. If ever on earth there was a time when we might venture to express with candour what is hidden within our minds and hearts, it would seem, monsieur, that the time is now. True, I have known you only one day and one evening. Yet what happened to the world in that brief space of time, and to us, monsieur, brought us together as though our meeting were but a blessed reunion after a happy intimacy of many years. I speak, monsieur, for myself. May I hope that I speak also for you. With a heart too full to thank you, and with expectations indescribable, but with courage always for any event, I take my leave of you at the foot of this page. Like death, I trust my adieu is not the end, but the beginning. It is not farewell. It is a greeting to him whom I most honour in all the world, and would willingly obey if he shall command. And otherwise, all else that is in his mind and heart he might desire. Theodorica. It was the most beautiful love letter any man ever received in all of the history of love, and it had passed the censor. 3. It was afternoon when Darragh awoke in his bunk, stiff, sore, confused in mind and battered in body. However, when he recollected where he was, he got out of bed in a hurry and jerked aside the window curtains. The day was magnificent, a sky of royal azure overhead, everywhere the silver pillars of the birches supporting their splendid canopy of ochre, orange, and burnt gold. Weir, hearing him astir, came in. "How long have you been back? Did you meet the ladies with your flivver?" demanded Darragh impatiently. "I got to Five Lakes Station just as the train came in. The young ladies were the only passengers who got out. I waited to get their steamer trunks, and then I drove them to Harrod Place." "How did they seem, Ralph? Worn out, worried, ill?" Weir laughed. "No, sir. They looked very pretty and lively to me. They seemed delighted to get here. They talked to each other in some foreign tongue. Russian, I would say. At least it sounded like what we heard over in Siberia, Captain." "It was Russian. You go on and tell me while I take another hot bath." Weir followed him into the bathroom and vaulted to a seat on the deep-set window sill. "When they weren't talking Russian and laughing, they talked to me and admired the woods and mountains. I had to tell them everything. They wanted to see buffalo and Indians, and when I told them there weren't any, inquired for bears and panthers. We saw 2 deer on the scour and a woodchuck near the house. I thought they'd jump out of the flivver." He began to laugh at the recollection. "No, sir. They didn't act tired and sad. They said they were crazy to get into their knickerbockers and go to look for you." "Where did you say I was?" asked Darragh, drying himself vigorously. "Out in the woods somewhere. The last I saw of them, Miss Ray had her handbags, and Jerry and Tom were shouldering their trunks." "I'm going up there right away," interrupted Darragh excitedly. "Good heavens, Ralph, I haven't any clothes here, have I?" "No, sir, but those you wore last night are dry." "Confound it. I meant to send some decent clothes here. All right, get me those duds I wore yesterday, and a bite to eat. I'm in a hurry, Ralph." He ate while dressing, disgustedly arraying himself in a grey shirt, breeches, and laced boots which weather, water, rock, and briar had not improved. In a pathetic attempt to spruce up, he knotted the red bandana around his neck and pinched Salzar's slouch hat into a peak. "I look like a hooch-running wop," he said. "Maybe I can get into the house before I meet the ladies." "You look like one of Clinch's bums," remarked Weir with native honesty. Darragh, chagrined, went to his bunk, pulled the morocco case from under the pillow, and shoved it into the bosom of his flannel shirt. "That's the main thing, anyway," he thought. Then, turning to Weir, he asked whether Eve and Stormont had wakened. It appeared that Trooper Stormont had saddled up and cantered away shortly after sunrise, leaving word that he must hunt up his comrade, Trooper Lannis, at Ghost Lake. "They're coming back this evening," added Weir. "He asked you to look out for Clinch's stepdaughter." "She's all right here. Can't you keep an eye on her, Ralph?" "I'm stripping trout, sir. I'll be around here to cook dinner for her when she wakes up." Darragh glanced across the brook at the hatchery. It was only a few yards away. He nodded and started for the veranda. "That'll be all right," he said. "Nobody is coming here to bother her. And don't let her leave, Ralph, till I get back." "Very well, sir. But suppose she takes it into her head to leave?" Darragh called back gaily: "She can't. She hasn't any clothes." And away he strode in the gorgeous sunshine of a magnificent autumn day, all the clean and vigorous youth of fire in anticipation of a reunion which the letter from his lady love had transfigured into a tryst. For, in that amazing courtship of a single day, he never dreamed that he had won the heart of that sad, white-faced, hungry child in rags, silken tatters still stained with the blood of massacre, the very soles of her shoes still charred by the embers of her own home. Yet that is what must have happened in a single day and evening. Life passes swiftly during such periods. Minutes lengthen into days, hours into years. The soul finds itself. Then mind and heart become twin prophets, clairvoyant concerning what hides behind the veil, comprehending with divine clairaudience what the three sisters whispered there, hearing even the whir of the spindle, the very snipping of the eternal shears. The soul finds itself, the mind knows itself, the heart perfectly understands. He had not spoken to this young girl of love. The blood of friends and the servants was still rusty in her skirt's ragged hem. Yet that night, when at last in safety she had said good bye to the man who had secured it for her, he knew that he was in love with her. And at such crisis the veil that hides hearts becomes transparent. At that instant he had seen and known. Afterwards he had dared not to believe that he had known. But hers had been a pure courage. As he strode on, the comprehension of her candour, her honesty, the sweet bravery that had conceived, created, and sent that letter, thrilled this young man until his heavy boots sprouted wings, and the trail he followed was but a path of rosy clouds over which he floated heavenward. About half an hour later he came to his senses with a distinct shock. Straight ahead of him on the trail, and coming directly toward him, moved a figure in knickers and belted tweed. Flecked sunlight slanted on the stranger's cheek and burnished hair, dappling face and figure with moving golden spots. Instantly Darragh knew and trembled. But Theodorica of Estonia had known him only in his uniform. As she came toward him, lovely in her lithe and rounded grace, only friendly curiosity gazed at him from her blue eyes. Suddenly she knew him, went scarlet to her yellow hair and then white, and tried to speak, but had no control of the short rosy lip which only quivered as he took her hands. The forest was dead still around them save the whisper of the painted leaves sifting down from the sunlit vault above. Finally she said in a ghost of a voice, "My friend, if you accept this friendship is to be shared, ours mingled. On that day your share is as much as pleases you. All you have to give me then. Take it, all I have." Her blue eyes met his with a little effort. All courage is an effort. Then the young man dropped on both knees at her feet and laid his lips to her soft hands. In trembling silence she stood for a moment, then slowly sank on both knees to face him across their clasped hands. So, in the gilded cathedral of the woods, pillared with silver and azure domed, the betrothal of these two was sealed with clasp and lip. Awed, a little fearful, she looked into her lover's eyes with a gaze so chaste, so oblivious to all things earthly, that the still purity of her face seemed a sacrament, and he scarcely dared touch the childish lips she offered. But when the sacrament of the kiss had been accomplished, she rested one hand on his shoulder and rose, and drew him with her. Then his moment came. He drew the emblazoned case from his breast, opened it, and in silence laid it in her hands. The blaze of the jewels in the sunshine almost blinded them. This was his moment. The next was Quintana's. Darragh hadn't a chance. Out of the bushes 2 pistols were thrust hard against his stomach. Quintana's face was behind them. He wore no mask, but the 3 men with him watched him, over the edges of the handkerchief, over the sights of levelled rifles, too. The young Grand Duchess had turned deadly white. One of Quintana's men took the morocco case from her hand and shoved her aside without ceremony. Quintana leered at Darragh over his levelled weapons. "My friend Smith," he exclaimed softly, "so it is you, then, who have twice tried to rob me of my property. Ah, you recollect, yes, how you have robbed me of my packet, which contained only some chocolate." Darragh's face was burning with helpless rage. "My friend Smith," repeated Quintana, "do you recollect what you said to me, yes? How often it is the unexpected which so usually happens. You are quite correct, l'ami Smith. It has happened." He glanced at the open jewel box which one of the masked men held, then, like lightning, his sinister eyes focused on Darragh. "So," he said, "it was also you who robbed me last night of my property. What you do to Nick Salzar, eh?" "Killed him," said Darragh, dry-lipped, nerved for death. "I ought to have killed you, too, when I had the chance. But I'm white, you see." At the insult flung into his face over the muzzles of his own pistols, Quintana burst into laughter. "Ah, you should have shot me. You are quite right, my friend. I must say you have behaved very foolish." He laughed again, so hard that Darragh felt his pistols shaking against his body. "So you have killed Nick Salzar, eh?" continued Quintana with perfect good humour. "My friend, I am obliged for you for what you do. You are surprised, eh? It is very simple, my friend Smith. What I want of a man who can be killed, eh? Of what use is he to me? Voilà." He laughed, patted Darragh on the shoulder with one of his pistols. "You, now, you could be of use. Why? Because you are a better man than was Nick Salzar. He who kills is better than the dead." Then swiftly his dark features altered. "My friend Smith," he said, "I have come here for my property, not to kill. I have recovered my property. Why shall I kill you? To say that I am a better man? Yes, perhaps. But also I should be obliged to say that also I am a fool. Yes, a poor damn fool." Without shifting his eyes, he made a motion with one pistol to his men. As they turned and entered the thicket, Quintana's intent gaze became murderous. "If I must kill you, I shall do so. Otherwise I have sufficient trouble to keep from ennui. My friend, I am going home to enjoy my property. If you live or die, it signifies nothing to me. No. Why, for the pleasure of killing you, should I bring your dirty gendarmes on my heels?" He backed away into the edge of the thicket, venturing one swift and evil glance at the girl, who stood as though dazed. "Listen attentively," he said to Darragh. "One of my men remains hidden very near. He is a dead shot. His aim is at your sweetheart's body, you understand?" "Yes." "Very well. You shall not go away for 1 hour time. After that," he took off his slouch hat with a sweeping bow, "you may go to hell." Behind him the bushes parted, closed. José Quintana had made his adieu. End of Episode 8.